She looked at the little girl she loved more than anything in the world. She smiled. Then she called her by the wrong name. For a brief moment, no one seemed to notice. Margaret caught herself almost immediately. Oh goodness! I meant Sophie. She laughed. Sophie laughed with her. The conversation moved on as if nothing had happened. But someone else didn't move on. Emily. She couldn't explain why. It had lasted no more than a second. There was no confusion. No panic. No forgotten face. Just one simple mistake, followed by an immediate correction. The kind of mistake almost everyone has made. And yet, for the rest of the day, Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. Because somewhere deep inside, a question had quietly appeared. A question she had never needed to ask before. When does ordinary forgetfulness stop being ordinary? Most families believe they'll recognize the first sign of a serious memory problem the moment it appears. They imagine something dramatic. A loved one forgetting a familiar face. Getting lost on a street they've walked for years. Looking at someone they love, without recognizing them. But real life rarely announces itself that way. More often, it begins with a moment so small that almost everyone laughs and moves on. Parents mix up names. Grandparents do it. Teachers do it. Even doctors occasionally do it. Most of the time, it means absolutely nothing. Which is exactly why that morning became so confusing for Emily. Not because Margaret seemed frightened. Not because she looked different. Not because anything else about the day had changed. But because, for the first time in her life, Emily realized she didn't know where the line was. The line between normal aging and something that deserved a closer look. To Margaret, it was nothing more than a harmless mistake. The kind of thing people joke about every day. After all, who hasn't mixed up names before? Parents do it. Grandparents do it. Teachers do it. Even doctors sometimes do it. Margaret simply shrugged. I'm just getting older. The conversation moved on. But Emily couldn't. The words stayed with her long after everyone else had forgotten them. Why? Because something inside her refused to let go. Not because she believed her grandmother was seriously ill. Because she suddenly realized she had never asked herself a question that millions of families eventually ask. When does normal forgetfulness stop being normal? That question followed her for the rest of the day. She watched Margaret laugh with Sophie. She watched her prepare lunch. She watched her tell stories she'd heard dozens of times before. Nothing seemed different. Margaret remembered everyone's favorite foods. She remembered the flowers that needed watering. She remembered a birthday coming up the following week. Everything looked exactly the way it always had. And yet, Emily couldn't stop thinking about that one small mistake. Was she overreacting? Or had she just witnessed the beginning of something much bigger? Late that evening, after driving home, Emily found herself staring at one familiar name on her phone. Dr. James Carter, their family physician. The man who had known Margaret for years. The man she trusted more than anyone when it came to her grandmother's health. She hesitated. Was she worrying over nothing? Would she sound foolish? Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe it was simply part of getting older. Eventually, Emily made the call. Dr. Carter answered with his usual calm voice. Emily described exactly what had happened. Then she asked the question that countless families have asked before her. Should I be worried? There was a brief silence. Not because Dr. Carter didn't know the answer. Because he knew the answer wasn't as simple as Emily hoped. Finally he spoke. Maybe. A short pause followed. Then he added quietly, maybe not. Dr. Carter didn't answer Emily's question right away. Instead he asked one of his own. Emily, how many times have you walked into a room and forgotten why you were there? She smiled. More times than I'd like to admit. And your car keys? They disappear almost every week. What about glasses? Emily laughed. I've spent 5 minutes looking for them. While they were sitting on my head. Dr. Carter chuckled. You're not alone. Then his voice became thoughtful. Margaret has probably done the same. So have I. So has nearly every patient I've ever treated. Emily frowned. So forgetting isn't unusual? Not at all. In fact, our brains make thousands of tiny mistakes every single day. Most of them are so small, we never even notice. Emily listened quietly. She had expected a medical explanation. Instead, she was hearing something surprisingly ordinary. Dr. Carter continued. We forget where we parked. We forget a neighbor's name. We forget why we opened the refrigerator. We forget which day someone told us a story. We even forget words we use all the time. He paused. None of those things automatically mean something is wrong. Emily nodded slowly. She had experienced every one of those moments herself. So why did this feel different? Dr. Carter answered gently. Because it involved someone you love. When it happens to us, we laugh. When it happens to someone we love, we worry. Emily had never thought about it that way. It was true. If she had mixed up two names, she would have forgotten about it within seconds. But when Grandma did it, it stayed with her all day. Dr. Carter continued. Our minds are wired to notice possible danger, especially when it comes to the people we care about. It's part of being human. Emily felt herself relax. She wasn't overreacting because she lacked knowledge. She was reacting because she loved her grandmother. There was a difference. But, she asked quietly, if everyone forgets, why do so many families fear dementia the moment something like this happens? Dr. Carter didn't hesitate. Because memory feels personal. We expect our eyesight to change. We expect our knees to ache. We expect gray hair. But memory feels like identity. So when memory slips, our imagination often runs much farther than reality. Emily looked out the window. She remembered watching Margaret laugh with Sophie just a few hours earlier. Nothing about her grandmother had seemed frightened. Only Emily had been. Dr. Carter spoke again. And that's why we have to be careful. Fear has a way of turning one small moment into the entire story. Emily quietly repeated those words to herself. One small moment is not the entire story. For the first time since that morning, she wondered if she had been asking the wrong question all along. Maybe the real question wasn't, why did Margaret forget? Maybe it was something else entirely. Something Dr. Carter was about to ask next. Emily expected Dr. Carter to ask another question about memory. Instead, he surprised her. Emily, when Margaret called Sophie by the wrong name, what happened next? Emily paused. She hadn't expected that question. I'm not sure what you mean. Dr. Carter smiled. I mean exactly what I asked. What happened next? Emily replayed the moment in her mind. She stopped. She smiled. Then she corrected herself. And after that? They kept talking. Sophie laughed. They finished the conversation. Dr. Carter nodded. And did Margaret seem confused? No. Did she forget who Sophie was? No. Did she continue calling her by the wrong name? No. Emily suddenly realized where he was leading her. Dr. Carter wasn't interested in the mistake itself. He was interested in what happened after it. He spoke gently. That's an important difference. One that many families never think to notice. Emily listened carefully. We tend to focus on the moment someone forgets. But as physicians, we often learn more from what happens next. Emily had never heard anyone explain memory that way. Dr. Carter continued. A healthy brain can make mistakes. But it usually recognizes those mistakes. It corrects them. It moves on. Emily thought about her grandmother again. Margaret hadn't looked frightened. She hadn't seemed lost. She had simply smiled, corrected herself, and continued enjoying the morning. That's why, Dr. Carter said, one forgotten name doesn't tell me very much. Emily frowned. It doesn't. No, not by itself. Because memory isn't measured by a single moment. It's measured over time. Those words stayed with Emily. Measured over time. Not by one conversation. Not by one afternoon. Not by one forgotten name. Dr. Carter leaned back in his chair. Emily, If I only watched 30 seconds of someone's life, I could reach the wrong conclusion about almost anything. Emily smiled. I suppose that's true. The same is true for memory. A single moment is only one page. It is never the whole story. For the first time since making the phone call, Emily felt something inside her begin to change. She wasn't becoming less concerned. She was becoming more curious. Curious enough to ask a better question. If one mistake isn't enough, then what should families actually be watching? Dr. Carter smiled. Now, that's exactly the right question. Dr. Carter let the silence linger for a moment. Then he asked another question. Emily, has this happened before? She thought carefully. I don't know. I've never really paid attention. Exactly. He nodded. And that's why we shouldn't draw conclusions from a single moment. Emily looked puzzled. So what should we look for? Patterns. He said the word slowly. As physicians, we're rarely interested in one isolated event. We're interested in whether that event keeps happening. Emily listened closely. If someone misplaces their keys once, that tells me almost nothing. If it happens every day, that's different. If someone forgets a neighbor's name after not seeing them for years, that's understandable. But if they begin forgetting the people they see every morning, now I want to understand why. Emily nodded. For the first time, the idea felt surprisingly logical. Not every mistake carried the same meaning. Dr. Carter continued. Think about the weather. One rainy afternoon doesn't mean the climate has changed. Emily smiled. It takes time to recognize a pattern. Exactly. The brain works much the same way. One cloudy day doesn't tell the whole story. Emily looked down at the notebook she had been writing in. She slowly crossed out the sentence. One forgotten name. Then she wrote something new beneath it. Look for patterns. Dr. Carter smiled. I like that much better. Emily laughed. So you're telling me not to panic over one moment. I'm telling you not to let one moment become the entire story. He paused before continuing. If you truly want to understand how someone's memory is changing, ask yourself a few simple questions. Are the changes becoming more frequent? Do they interfere with everyday life? Are they different from 6 months ago? And most importantly, are they beginning to change who that person is? Emily stopped writing. That last question felt different. Not because it sounded medical, because it sounded deeply human. She thought about her grandmother. Margaret still loved her roses. She still laughed at the same old stories. She still remembered birthdays. She still looked forward to Sunday mornings. She still found joy in teaching Sophie something new.
There it is.
None of those things had changed. Dr. Carter noticed the expression on Emily's face.
Pretty.
What are you thinking? Emily smiled softly. I think I've been watching one moment instead of watching my grandmother. Dr. Carter nodded. And that's what fear often does. It narrows our focus. We stop seeing the whole person. We only see the mistake. Emily looked out the window. She suddenly understood why yesterday had felt so overwhelming. Not because Margaret had forgotten a name. Because Emily had allowed that single moment to overshadow everything else her grandmother was still doing beautifully. Dr. Carter spoke gently. Memory isn't a photograph. It's a story. And stories are never understood from one page. Emily quietly closed her notebook. She had called Dr. Carter hoping for certainty. And said he had given her something far more valuable. A better way to observe. A better way to understand. A better way to love. But as she drove home that evening, another thought began to surface. If patterns mattered more than isolated moments, were there other moments she had overlooked? Small details that had never seemed important before. Until now. That evening, Emily didn't call anyone. She didn't search the internet. She didn't make another appointment. Instead, she did something much simpler. She started remembering. Not one moment. Not one conversation. But the past several months. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Margaret still managed her own home. She still paid her bills. She still remembered birthdays before anyone else did. She still called every Sunday after church. She still knew exactly which flowers Sophie loved most. Emily smiled. Those memories came easily. Then she remembered something else. A few months earlier, Margaret had called to ask if Emily could remind her about a dentist appointment. At the time, Emily hadn't thought twice about it. Everyone asks for reminders now and then. Another memory surfaced. Margaret had once misplaced her reading glasses. 20 minutes later, she found them inside the pantry. Both of them had laughed about it for days. Then another. She had forgotten where she parked after leaving the grocery store. It took her a few extra minutes to find the car. She came home joking that perhaps the car had wandered off by itself. Emily smiled again. None of those memories had frightened her when they happened, because none of them had changed who Margaret was. She was still independent, still confident, still joyful, still curious. The more Emily looked back, the more she realized something unexpected. She wasn't finding a pattern of decline. She was finding a pattern of ordinary life. Life filled with small mistakes, small corrections, and countless moments that proved Margaret was still very much herself. The next morning, Emily shared those memories with Dr. Carter. When she finished, he smiled. "What do you notice?" Emily thought for a moment. "I noticed that every story has two parts. The mistake. And what happened afterward." He nodded. "And what happened afterward?" "She figured it out." She laughed. "Or she asked for help. But she always found her way." Dr. Carter leaned forward. "That's exactly what I hoped you would see." Emily looked at him. So the pattern wasn't forgetting. No. The pattern was adapting. Those words stopped her. Adapting. She had been looking for evidence that Margaret's memory was failing. Instead, she had discovered something far more important. Her grandmother still knew how to solve problems, still knew how to adjust, still knew how to move forward. Dr. Carter smiled. "Our brains aren't judged by whether we ever make mistakes. They're judged by how well we respond to them." Emily suddenly realized how unfair she had been to Margaret. One forgotten name had almost erased months of evidence that her grandmother was living a full, capable, independent life. She looked down quietly. "I think fear made me notice the wrong things." Dr. Carter nodded. "It often does. It shines a spotlight on one moment, while leaving everything else in the dark." Emily smiled. "I don't want to do that anymore. I'm glad. Because there is something every family should understand." Emily waited. The goal isn't to catch every forgotten word. The goal is to understand the whole person. She thought about Margaret, not as someone who had mixed up a name, but as the woman who still taught Sophie, still cared for her roses, still welcomed every new day with purpose. For the first time since that Saturday morning, Emily felt something she hadn't expected. Not certainty, not relief, something quieter. Perspective. And that perspective prepared her for the next conversation, because Dr. Carter was about to explain why the brain behaves this way in the first place. Dr. Carter picked up a small notebook from his desk. "Emily, imagine you've lived in the same town for 50 years. She nodded. "Every street becomes familiar. You don't need to think about where the grocery store is. You don't need directions to get home. You simply know." Emily smiled. "That sounds like Margaret. It sounds like all of us." He continued. "Our brains work in much the same way. They build countless pathways over the course of a lifetime. Every conversation, every birthday, every face, every favorite recipe, every family story. They're all connected." Emily listened quietly. "So why do we sometimes reach for the wrong name?" Dr. Carter smiled. "Because memories aren't stored in neat little folders. They're connected like neighborhoods." Emily looked curious. "What do you mean?" "If two memories live very close together, it's easy to visit the wrong address first." Emily laughed softly. "So calling Sophie by the wrong name doesn't necessarily mean Margaret forgot who she was." "Exactly. It may simply mean the brain reached the wrong doorway before finding the right one." Emily paused. "I've done that." "So have I." So has almost everyone. Dr. Carter leaned back. The remarkable part isn't that the mistake happened. It's that Margaret recognized it immediately. Emily remembered the moment clearly. There had been no confusion, no panic, just a smile. Correction. And the conversation continued. Dr. Carter continued. That's something many families overlook. They focus on the wrong name, instead of noticing how quickly the right one returned. Emily nodded slowly. That changes the way I see it. I hoped it would. He picked up 2 coffee mugs from the table. Think of these as 2 people you love. They're sitting right beside each other. If I reach without looking, I might grab the wrong one for a second. He smiled. But that doesn't mean I forgot which mug belongs to whom. Emily laughed. No. It just means you reached a little too quickly. Exactly. The brain does something very similar. He placed the mugs back on the table. As we grow older, retrieving information may sometimes take a little longer. But slower doesn't automatically mean broken. Those words settled gently between them. Emily realized how often people confuse speed with ability. If someone climbed stairs more slowly, it didn't mean they had forgotten how to walk. Perhaps memory deserved the same kindness. Dr. Carter continued. Healthy aging often changes the speed of retrieval. Not the meaning. Not the love. Not the experiences that shaped a lifetime. Emily thought about Margaret again. Her grandmother still remembered every bedtime story Sophie loved. Still remembered the roses planted by her late husband. Still remembered the children she had taught decades earlier. One delayed name could never erase a lifetime of memories. There is another reason I wanted you to understand this, Dr. Carter said. Emily looked up. When families become frightened, they sometimes stop trusting the older adult. They answer every question. They interrupt every sentence. They take over every decision. Emily felt a knot in her stomach. She had nearly done exactly that. I didn't realize. Most families don't. They're trying to protect someone they love. But sometimes, protecting can quietly become replacing. Emily was silent. She understood now that confidence mattered too. If Margaret began doubting herself every time she forgot a word, fear itself could become another burden. Dr. Carter smiled reassuringly. The best support doesn't come from correcting every mistake. It comes from giving someone the confidence to keep participating. Emily nodded. For the first time, she understood that memory wasn't only about what the brain could remember. It was also about whether a person still felt confident enough to keep living fully. And that naturally led to one final question. If confidence mattered, what everyday habits helped protect it as people grew older? Emily looked at Dr. Carter. If memory changes are part of aging, is there anything we can actually do? There is. He smiled. But probably not the answer you're expecting. Emily leaned forward. I thought you might recommend a supplement. So do most people. And sometimes they expect a single food, or a single exercise, or a single miracle solution. He gently shook his head. Our brains don't stay healthy because of one big decision. They're shaped by hundreds of small ones. Emily nodded. Like what? Dr. Carter smiled. Let's keep it simple. Move your body. Sleep well. Stay connected. Keep learning. Give yourself something to look forward to. Emily noticed something interesting. None of those sound like medical treatments. They're not. They're daily habits. And over time, daily habits become lifelong patterns. Emily thought about her grandmother. Without trying to follow any special program, Margaret already walked almost every day. She spent hours in her garden. She read before bed. She met friends after church. She loved teaching Sophie something new every weekend. Dr. Carter smiled. Do you see what Margaret has been doing all these years? Emily laughed softly. She didn't know she was protecting her brain. Probably not. But she was giving it exactly what it needed. He paused. The brain was never designed for isolation. It thrives on movement, conversation, curiosity, and purpose. Emily quietly repeated the last word. Purpose. It may be more important than people realize. When we stop believing tomorrow has something worth getting up for, our minds often become quieter. But when life continues to offer meaning, the brain keeps showing up. Emily thought about Margaret's calendar. There was always something written on it. A library visit, church on Sunday, coffee with a neighbor, planting new flowers, baking with Sophie. None of those activities seemed extraordinary, but together, they created a life that was still moving forward. Dr. Carter continued. You don't have to fill every hour. You don't have to stay busy all the time. You simply need reasons to stay engaged with life. Emily smiled. That sounds much more hopeful than chasing perfect memory. It is. Because perfect memory has never existed. But a meaningful life is something we can continue building at any age. Emily sat quietly for a moment. She realized the conversation had changed completely. They were no longer talking about forgetting. They were talking about living. And somehow, that felt like the lesson she had needed all along. Before they stood up to leave, Dr. Carter offered one final thought. If you want to help someone protect their memory, don't only remind them what they've forgotten. Help them create something worth remembering tomorrow. Emily smiled. She knew exactly who she wanted to spend tomorrow with. A few days later, Emily noticed something she might have missed before. Margaret paused in the middle of a sentence. For just a moment, she searched for a word. Then she smiled. There it is. The conversation continued. No embarrassment. No frustration. No apology. Emily smiled too. A week earlier, that brief pause would have filled her with fear. Now it reminded her of something Dr. Carter had said. One moment is never the whole story. Over the following weeks, life settled back into its familiar rhythm. Some mornings, Margaret misplaced her reading glasses. Other mornings, Emily forgot where she left her own phone. Sophie still laughed when adults mixed up names. Life continued exactly as life always had. Imperfect. Busy. Beautiful. One afternoon, Emily admitted something to Dr. Carter. I've changed. He smiled. In what way? I don't panic every time Grandma forgets something. And why is that? Because now I know what I'm actually watching. Dr. Carter nodded. And what are you watching? Emily answered without hesitation. I'm watching patterns. I'm watching whether she's still living the life she loves. I'm watching whether she's still solving problems. I'm watching whether she's still herself. Dr. Carter smiled. That's exactly what I hoped you would say. Emily looked toward Margaret, who was laughing with Sophie across the garden. The scene felt wonderfully familiar. Not because Margaret never forgot another word. Because everyone had stopped expecting perfection. They had started appreciating something much more important. Confidence. Joy. Connection. Margaret eventually joined them. She looked at Emily and smiled. You know, I've been thinking about that morning. Emily laughed. The wrong name. Margaret nodded. I suppose getting older teaches you something. What's that? You can spend your energy worrying about every little mistake. Or you can laugh, correct yourself, and keep enjoying the people you love. Emily smiled. I think that's pretty good advice. So do I. Margaret gently squeezed her hand. We've all been forgetting little things our entire lives. The important thing is not to forget living. Emily felt those words settle deep inside her. She realized something had changed. Not Margaret. Herself. She no longer saw aging as something to fear. She saw it as something to understand. And understanding had quietly replaced anxiety with compassion. As the afternoon came to an end, Dr. Carter watched the three generations talking together. Then he smiled. Today wasn't really about memory. Emily looked at him. No. It was about knowing the difference between normal aging and something that deserves closer attention. Emily nodded. And that's a difference every family should understand. A few weeks later, Emily found herself thinking back to that Saturday morning. The morning that had started with one simple mistake. At the time, it had felt frightening. Now, it felt different. Not because she had found all the answers, but because she had learned to ask better questions. She no longer wondered, "Did Grandma forget a name?" she asked. "Is Grandma still living the life she loves?" She no longer searched for perfection. She looked for patterns. She looked for confidence. She looked for joy. Most importantly, she remembered something Dr. Carter had said during their very first conversation. One moment is never the whole story. That single idea had changed everything. Not only the way she understood memory, but the way she understood aging itself. Because growing older was never about becoming someone different. It was about continuing to live with purpose, while accepting that nobody's brain had ever been perfect. Not at 30, not at 50, and certainly not at 74. Later that afternoon, the three of them sat together on Margaret's porch. Sophie was drawing quietly nearby. Emily poured coffee. Margaret smiled as she watched her granddaughter and great-granddaughter laughing together. It was one of those ordinary afternoons that families often forget to appreciate, until years later. Dr. Carter looked at Margaret. "Today we talked about memory." She nodded. "We did." He smiled. "And I hope one thing is clear." Margaret looked at him. "So do I." He paused for a moment before continuing. "But do you know something that surprises almost every family I meet?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Dr. Carter smiled gently. "Memory problems certainly matter. But they aren't responsible for as many serious injuries in older adults as most people believe." Emily looked at him with curiosity. "If it's not memory, then what is?" Dr. Carter let the question hang for a moment. Then he answered with one simple word. "Balance." Emily looked surprised. Margaret did too. Dr. Carter nodded. "Every year, millions of older adults are hospitalized because of falls. And many of those falls happen to people whose memory is still perfectly normal." A thoughtful silence settled over the porch. Emily had never connected those two ideas. Memory and balance. "They seem unrelated," she said. "They often do." Dr. Carter smiled. "But the body has a remarkable way of reminding us that everything is connected." He stood and picked up his jacket. "I think that's a conversation worth having." Margaret smiled. "I'll make the coffee." Emily laughed. "And I'll bring my notebook this time." Dr. Carter nodded. "Good." Because understanding balance may be one of the most important things we can do to protect independence as we grow older. He started walking toward his car, then turned back one last time. "I'll see you both next week." The three of them waved goodbye. None of them realized that the next conversation might help prevent something far more common than memory loss. Something that changes millions of lives every year. A fall. Fade out. Next episode. Why balance matters more than you think.